We're ready.
All right, you can start recording now.
Got recording?
Yeah.
Hit the play button. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Jordan. I'm from the Newport office, and I'm here today for reasons unrelated to this presentation. But we're here today to talk about the new React toolkit that a lot of us in this room have been working on. The audience kind of for today's presentation, a lot of people are already familiar with this, so it might be more tailored to people who aren't familiar with it, maybe new hires or just people who just haven't heard about it. I've also invited Tim and some of the marketing folks in as well to see what we've been working on. Audience. There's going to be like 10 of us presenting as well, so it's not just going to be me. All right, so let's get started. So what we'll be talking about today, there we go. One, like why are we even here? Why are we doing this? Who's been working on it? Talking about the difference between a style guide and a toolkit. We've got a portion of the discussion that's for the designers. We've got a portion of the discussion that's for developers. And then we've got a portion that's for designers and developers together. And we'll also be talking about some of the recent work and the documentation where you can find everything. All right, so we'll get started. Why are we here? What are we talking about? Why are we making a toolkit? So I'll hand it over to Steve over in Newport.
Hey guys, I'm Steve. I'm an engineer in Newport, in case you don't know me. Let me talk a little bit about why do we have a toolkit? Why do we want to have a toolkit? I think if you're a developer, having common components is kind of a no-brainer. It allows us to have reusable building blocks. It allows us to have something that's tested and reusable moving forward. So that part's kind of obvious, I think. Some of the other benefits, though, from a UX perspective, and we're going to talk about this, whenever we have a certain kind of component or widget in the interface, we want it to behave exactly the same way throughout. So if you have a button, it always works the same way. We don't want to be rebuilding that thing from scratch over and over. That's just insane. So from both a design and development perspective, we want that consistency across the app. The other thing that I think is a real benefit to having a toolkit is having components that kind of act as a way of communicating between design and development. It allows you to kind of focus in on that one component, build it right. But then once you have that defined, you don't have to redefine it every time. You know, the design team does not have to give us a red line for how this widget lays out, because we've already been through that one. So I think you get a little design clarity out of that. You get an easier way to communicate with between the developers and designers. At least that's my personal experience. We have a new feature here. Do we have a component that works? Yeah, let's use it. And if not, how do we go about building it? And we'll talk a little bit about our process a little later. So those are some of the kind of the whys. I mean, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. But, you know, from the design perspective, you may think otherwise. I don't know. One thing that came up, and this was, I don't know, 6-9 months ago when the Homes team started building stuff in React, the question came up was, should we build our own from scratch, or should we leverage some open source out there, like a Bootstrap-based toolkit? And we had a lot of back and forth. It wasn't a black or white decision. There was a lot of pros and cons. But at the end of the day, we said, you know what, it makes sense for us to build our own. And part of the reason was, this is more of a technical thing. But when we build things in React, we tend to want to build things with a component-based styling. So the component kind of lives with its own styling. We do have global styles, but the component itself is localized styling. And in a case where you have like a Bootstrap framework, those are generally built on full global styles. That's the nature of Bootstrap. It's a CSS, really. So it didn't really kind of match up with the design philosophy around React and React components. Another thing we didn't want to get into would be a box. You know, if you're using a open source component and it doesn't work the way you want it to, then how do you go about fixing that? And it becomes more of overhead. Also, you may get a lot of extra features that you may not want, so there's a lot of bloat. So at the end of the day, someone once told me we're not we're not a real estate company that does technology. We're a technology company that does real estate. And we have the skills and the abilities to build our own toolkit. So we're going to go ahead and do that and ultimately have full control over our own destiny. So that's kind of why we build our own. I mentioned mostly our approach isn't completely restrictive so that we can't use an open source component. In fact, we use one called Google React Map or something like that. So certain components where it makes sense to use an open source, we can and do use that. But generally, for most of our UI, it is homegrown. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Nice, thanks, Steve. So that's a quick little introduction why we're here, why we're doing all this, and we'll touch in on a lot of those points in a little more detail coming up. So I want to talk real quick about who's on the team. There's kind of a newer council right now just to help move things forward from the design side. Myself on homes, Christina on CRE, Gary's on the ADC side. John has kind of been sponsoring the project. Where do you go? All right.
How can you miss me?
I don't know what happened there. The developers, there's been a ton of developers. The names here, so these might be the people, if you have more questions on the dev side, those are the guys you can reach out to: Steve, Jeremy, Connor, Artem, Sergi, and Emily. From the design side, you can reach out to myself, Christina, or Gary. Those are kind of the people that you can reach out to for right now. But really, if you go to the next slide, everybody has been working on this and everybody has been contributing on this so far. So these are all the people that have contributed in some way or another. And really, it's like it's a company project. We just have a smaller team to help push things forward. But it's kind of something that everybody's working on. So don't feel like it's just a couple people working on this. It's a big, big effort here. All right, so I'll hand it over to Christina to talk about style guide versus the toolkit.
Yeah. So I'm Christina. I'm a product designer on the CRE side. So if you guys don't really know too much about style guides versus toolkit or what the differences are, Emily and I are going to kind of break that down for you guys quickly. So usually a style guide, designers start with a style guide and we try to think about patterns that are going to help build the UI and how we can make that scalable and bring that into the toolkit format. So how we define style guide is a set of well-defined and reusable patterns that help define and support our product branding, the visual language and the experience, and just how do we provide more consistency for our users and for the design team. So if you go to the next slide, I have a few examples of companies that you guys have probably heard of and what their style guides look like. So usually it's built from, they have foundational components like color palette, typography, how to use that, down to really detailed components like cards, for example, dialog boxes, and even like animation or interaction details. And then this is another example of an existing style guide, which kind of blends a little bit more into toolkits. So this is Bootstrap's example. And one thing to note is that, we do have 3 different lines of businesses. There's the auction, who has their own set of, users, their own brand, their own business model, and the same goes for homes and CRE. And so we do have to have separate style guides that support, our individual needs. So this is an example of what those style guides look like for ADC on the top. CRE has their own on the right, and then Homes also has their own.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the toolkit. So simply put, the toolkit is the style guide codified. I think of it as 2 categories. So the first category is we have a bunch of reusable React components that match the functionality that the designers have designed and match the styles that they've defined. So these are things that if you're a feature developer, you might drop them right onto your page and they're ready to go as the design team has defined them. So things like a date picker or an input field, a carousel, those are some examples of components that we have in our toolkit. It also is a set of SCSS variables that represent the foundational blocks, I think, or what Christina called them, which represent things directly from the style guide, like the colors, borders, shadows, text sizes. And these are things that they do go into building the components, styling the components that are the first category, but they can also be used by developers in features to define things like what text should look like, or how much spacing is in between text, or basically defining styling that isn't coming from a toolkit component.
Is someone skydiving? Who is that?
I can't
Mute everyone. Come on.
I can't mute here from you will have to. Guys, can you all go on mute, please, if you're not speaking?
Or if you're vacuuming.
Okay, so that's how I think about it. I'm not sure. I hope that the other developers that have been working with it think about it that way as well. Okay, Jeremy's nodding his head, so at least one. Okay, so to give you an example of something, on the left, this is the grid that we use, and this is how it might appear in the style guide. So the designers came up with things like, we have a 12-column grid. You can nest grids. The gutters have this much spacing. And they define this. There are some things that are different between the 3 lines of business, but that was all clearly defined by the designers from each line of business. On the right-hand side, you'll see this component. So Jeremy took the style guide as it was defined by the designers, and he created a React grid component. And so on the right side, you can see some different properties that developers can use to put the pages together and represent the grid that the designers came up with. Here's another example of the style guide versus the toolkit. So on the left-hand side, the designers came up with ways to lay out forms and to validate inputs, when inputs should be validated, what they should look like if there are errors. And this was given to developers, mostly on the homes, who built a bunch of validated components. And so they specify when validation should occur, what things look like if there's an error. And you can see that the left and the right match, but the left is from designers and the right is for developers. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the style guides turn into the toolkit. So for the most part, our toolkit is made up of very generic, very simple components. So Steve mentioned a button earlier. Across the 3 lines of business, you're not going to have buttons acting differently. Same with things like date picker. You want the functionality to be the same. The designers don't have a reason why a date picker should act one way on one line of business and another way on another line of business. So for the most part, what you see in the toolkit, the functionality is exactly the same across components for each line of business. When we do have variances, we have different ways of dealing with that. We have a repo called React Contrib, and I won't go into that too much, but we handle things a little bit differently when components should act differently across lines of business. Where the variation comes in for turning the style guide into the toolkit is styling. So each line of business has a very distinct set of styles, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we accomplish that in the toolkit. Okay, so we have 3 themes in the toolkit. Essentially, when we talk about a theme, really it comes down to a set of SCSS variables that we use. So these are screenshots of the variables that are coming from the CRE theme. So you can see that we have colors defined, we have breakpoints. The breakpoint could be different across the 3 lines of business. We have some font sizes, we have icon dimensions. All of these came directly from the style guide. And each line of business has their own theme or constants file. All right, so to theme a component, what we have is each component is made up of a JSX file and an SCSS file. And all the functionality is defined in the JSX file as a React component. And then all of the styling is defined through the SCSS file. So for something like a date picker, how it works is you've got your JSX file and your SCSS file. The SCSS file imports variables, and the variables are either coming from the CRE theme, if you're working in CRE, or the ADC theme or the homes theme. And so once you import the variables for your theme, you're going to get a date picker that looks like your theme. Okay. We can stop for any questions along the way. Does anyone have any questions right now? Okay.
All right, so I'll talk a bit about, this is aimed for designers a little bit. So what does this mean for us as designers? Really, the toolkit is a set of guidelines to help us simplify our job. That's really all it is. It should make us quicker and focused on the complex aspects of our work. We shouldn't have to worry about how someone selects a year in a date picker. We should be worrying about how to simplify requirements given to us from PMs, or create some user flows. We shouldn't be thinking about where the close button goes in a modal. These guidelines are kind of your wheel, and you shouldn't have to reinvent these. These are kind of tried and true design patterns. Things have been around for a while. Maybe it's something that someone spent a lot of time thinking about, so hopefully it works the best that it can. That said, if you see something that's not right, feel free to improve it. And this is, I think Emily's going to talk about this on the development side as well. We can, if you make a change on a component, maybe the date picker isn't the best that it can be, improve it, make it better, and everybody is going to benefit from that. So if you update the date picker in one place, everybody's going to get that improvement across all 3 lines of business. And that's really powerful, because now you just saved a whole lot of time, 3 different teams from having to individually contribute to something. Now you've just saved a lot of time and effort from a lot of people.
So if there's a change that's added in there, so should the owners from different business lines should be watching for those changes and then pulling them over, or how are they notified about those changes?
We're trying to improve the process because the team has been growing so much, and Homes came on and contributed a ton to the toolkit that other teams can now pick up. So we're trying to figure out the best way to converge on designs and let everybody know when there are updates. The Toolkit Council that Jordan showed earlier with Jordan, Christine, and Gary, they've been working really closely together. So if there is something new coming in, they're trying as much as possible to meet and say, okay, here's something new. Will your team use it? If so, does it function correctly for you? If so, what styling will you need versus what I need? So that then they can hand something over to whoever's going to be building it and make it work for as many lines of business as possible.
But also making sure that we don't break something for a line of business. So I think one specific use case was, I forget what we were changing, but we were updating something, and Gary was like, whoa, we can't do that in ADC right now. That's just not going to work for us. You know, he reached out to the product team. We all sort of reached out to the product team, say, hey, this change is coming. Is that acceptable? And for ADC, the answer was no. But that's okay, because I think then we were able to hold back that update from ADC. And then lastly here for designers, we're creating this consistent paradigm. Global patterns are going to help create this familiar experience across the application. It's going to create this familiar experience for your users. So that's going to, at the end of the day, reduce cognitive load, improve usability, and it'll also help standardize 10x as a brand, which Tim over there will appreciate. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So here's an example of one of the components. Homes was moving really quickly with re-implementing some of our like the header bar up there. We said we just need to move as quickly as possible. So we took the drop-down menu that already existed, and we got that for free. But we heard some grumblings. Some people said, well, we think it can be improved. Homes team kind of agreed, and we went ahead and sort of took that first step and say, hey, what if we update the header to look like this? And so right now we're in the process of sort of socializing that across the 3 lines of businesses, making sure that that's something that's acceptable. And hey, if we make this improvement, is that improvement okay for everybody else? So this is one of the things that's ongoing right now. So the next one. So the next question is kind of like, well, what if we got a new component? How do new components get added? The short answer is it should be fairly organic. Don't worry too much about a specific process, but if you wanted a process, kind of think about it as, hey, I'm starting. You have a question?
No.
Okay, you looked at me like I had a question. If you're starting a new project, think about the existing components you can use. And if there's components in there that aren't going to work, then maybe you need to create a new pattern. But think small. Start on your own project. Create that new pattern. You're going to use that for your project. You're going to test it, make sure that your project, your feature is working well. And then start socializing it organically. And I think a good example of this is we have, what's the thing called that you just asked me about yesterday? The carousel. Yeah, like the modal carousel. We had built something like that a couple weeks ago, and I don't even know how Marcus heard about it, but he did it, organically, got socialized, and he said, hey, that sounds like something I could use. And so the conversation started. So this wasn't something that was originally a component. We actually went into it saying, this is not going to be a component because we don't want to have to worry about the other businesses, the line of businesses requirements right now. But Marcus heard about it and said, I can use that. That's something I can use. Let's turn it into a component. Let's turn it into something that he can get for free. And any improvements he'll make, we'll get as well. So it's kind of organic. It's the process for creating new components, adding new components from the design side. Emily, you want to talk about developers?
Yeah. So we have a lot of new developers coming on board, and we're really working really hard to see how we can get people on board with using the toolkit and also contributing to it. Because like we said, everybody can contribute to the toolkit. Lots and lots of developers have contributed to the toolkit, and we want as many people involved as possible. So if you have not heard of the toolkit, I do want to give you some quick tips. And also, I would be really happy to meet with new developers outside of this meeting. Maybe Sergey and I could meet with you and talk more about this. But the quick tips that I have for getting started are go check out the Bitbucket repo, run the docs locally and familiarize yourself with the two categories of things that I talked about earlier, the components and the building blocks. I think even if you just open up the constants file, and that'll take you really far. And then start importing and using the components in your projects. If you have questions, we have you can go on the React Toolkit Slack channel, or feel free to reach out on the front end Slack channel. And we put everybody's faces up earlier, and now you know what we look like, so come and ask any of us if you have any questions as you go. Also, if you want to follow the releases, I think right now we've been making releases almost daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. If you want to follow these releases and see what the latest updates are, additions and bug fixes, there's a new channel called NPM Publish. And that also includes some other things like React, Contrib, and some other projects that you might want to follow. Once you're familiar with it and you're ready to start contributing, familiarize yourself with our React.js coding guidelines. This is also something that we haven't updated it in a little while, but I think now that we've all been using React for a while, these could maybe use a refresher. If you have any ideas about updates that you want to make to these guidelines or additions, feel free to, I think, talk to John, maybe.
Sure.
And then just go for it. Anyone can contribute. Feel free to just start making PRs. There's a group of people that will get included that'll be happy to give you feedback. Okay, so we also wanted to talk about how designers are working with developers and how we can all work together to make sure that we're using the latest components, that we're updating components and keeping people aware of what's been updated. So our goal really is efficiency, like the major efficiency and consistency, I think, are the common goals for everybody. We want designers to be efficient. We want developers to be efficient. To be most efficient, I think everyone would have to have an intimate knowledge of the toolkit. And right now, with the team growing so much and the features growing so much, that's really, really hard to do. But so we want to talk about different ways that designers and developers can work together to be as efficient as possible, whether you're a brand new developer or whether you've been here for a long time. And same with designers. So Jordan and I wanted to talk about types of deliverables. Do you want to go these?
You can start with this one.
Okay, so the first case is, this is a deliverable that Shafi created for the PDP project. It's amazing, it's very detailed, and Shafi's really familiar with the toolkit. He spent a lot of time working on the toolkit. Right here, what he provided for his developers is an annotation of everything that they could pull from the toolkit that they would need to build the new PDP. This was fantastic because he had Nate, who is a new developer working on the project, and Nate will talk in a little bit, but I think it made it a lot easier for Nate to come on board and start working with the toolkit. He also provided things like the spacing units. So he told Nate, you know, if you just go and you use 2 units here for spacing, 3 units here, he kind of helps him out learning the SCSS variables.
I think one really important thing that he called out in this file too is explicitly calling out, hey, I'm breaking the toolkit in this place. I'm not going to follow some of the rules because some of those guidelines don't work for what I'm trying to do. And so being able to communicate that clearly to developers, hey, kind of ignore the toolkit here, or I'm intentionally going around it because it just doesn't work for what we're trying to do. So another type of deliverable, sometimes you'll just get, as a developer, you'll just get a Zeppelin file. And these are really easy and really quick for designers to put out. When we're lazy, we might give you something that looks like this. And I think this just, you'll have to be a little more proactive as a developer to understand the toolkit and understand you're not going to get all those nice call outs here, but it is much quicker as a designer to pump out specs like these. So you could kind of tell by clicking around, you can see spacing, you can see layout, but you're not going to see exactly how this maps to the toolkit. So that's where knowledge of the toolkit is going to be helpful. And this could be one thing, a design team that we could be cognizant of is who's our audience. If our audience is someone you know, on that core toolkit team who has intimate knowledge of the toolkit, maybe we can get away with something like this. But if it is a new member of the development team, or we're not sure who it's going to, maybe we have to be a little more proactive in how we're handing off design. And then lastly, I had a dream that one day we could hand off something like this and just know what it maps to in the toolkit. I could give that screenshot to someone, a developer, and they'd know exactly what to do to implement that. So one day.
I hope the business also understands this.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah. So I'll let you talk about this, but first, developers, keep the designers honest. And if we're breaking the rules and we're not giving you a good reason why, tell us.
So while we were meeting, we were talking about these 3 types of deliverables, and we're like, how can we get from case 1 to case 3? Like, what are some things that we could recommend for everybody to be able to hand off design deliverables that don't take so much time and effort, but will still be developed precisely? So we came up with a set of rules that we'd like to start promoting. We have a spacing unit, and you saw that in Shafi's deliverable. All 3 lines of business have a 6-pixel spacing unit. So if you're working in Zeppelin and you see something like 11 pixels, you don't need to specify 11 pixels. You don't need to come back to the designer to ask about it. You don't need to come to Steve or Sergey or me to ask about it. Just go ahead and use 2 units. Just forget about that 1 pixel, just go with the 12 pixels. Same thing with colors. If you see something that looks, if you're working in CRE, you see something that looks 0098 EE-ish, and it's clickable, you have your variables in front of you, you see, just go with the link color.
This is something Steve loves to do with us. He'll call us out. What is this color? This is not a color we're using before. Why are you introducing a new color?
Yes.
All the time. So he keeps us on our toes. And it's good because it keeps things clean, keeps things more consistent.
If you see something in a wireframe that looks slightly off, you know, you can, and like Jordan said, you can always go back to your designer and say, hey, you're not following the toolkit here. Or if your designer is not accessible, just assume that they're using, unless they have called it out otherwise, they're using a toolkit component. So if something looks slightly off, just put the toolkit component in there. If you do go back to the designer and the designer says, oh no, I want that to be a variation of the component, I think this is better. That's the time where you say, well, if you think it's better, you know, should we go back to the toolkit and improve this and improve it across our line of business or improve it across 3 lines of business. And then I think Jordan covered this. This is a team effort. Speak up if something feels off, or if developers have design ideas, feel free to approach the designers and say, hey, I think we should change this design in the toolkit. What do you think about it? Did you consider it?
And yeah, sometimes it'll be a real quick decision. Yeah, let's do it. Other times it'll be, well, we've got to hold up. Let's run it by a bunch of people. Let's make sure it works across all 3 lines of business. But again, it's everybody in this room: product, marketing, design, development. These are our products. This is our brand. This is our voice. So everybody has a say there.
So we've been taking a lot of feedback from people, and we're going to continue taking feedback from people. I was talking to Nate the other day. So Nate is the new developer, for whoever doesn't know him. He's working with Shafi and those amazing deliverables on the PDP project. And I wanted him to talk a little bit about his experience working with the toolkit as a new developer and some ways we could improve the process.
Sure. So coming on to the project, I was really happy to see the toolkit because it was very similar to libraries like Material UI, things like that, where you have these plug-and-play components that were already styled and get you up and running very quickly. And so whenever I'm building a feature that uses the toolkit, it makes my life that much easier, right? I don't really have to do anything to that. It's already built, it's already styled. I can put it in. There's not really much else that I have to do with that. So it saves me a lot of time, and then we have consistency across the board. So that's another thing, is I don't have to worry about trying to match up with the style guide. It's already there for me. Also, the code is like very well documented, is very well commented. So even when I have issues and I'm looking through the code, I can look in the comments and generally find out what my issue is if I'm having one, whether it's missing some type of prop type or maybe I'm using something incorrectly. And then the docs have multiple use cases and explain the different prop types you can supply to the components to change their behavior. So it's also very, very helpful, and the ability to open them up in the Plunker tabs to actually examine that behavior. So it's you know, pretty foolproof. Most of the challenges that have with toolkits that have been here are really around the process, and that's really kind of 2 cases. One in which when I'm building a feature that maybe is something dynamic, maybe there isn't a designer, a screenshot for it, and QA is looking for a way to validate that my feature is working correctly. And they see it, it doesn't look and behave the way that they're seeing it in another application that's been built. And then, you know, I'm new, so they're probably thinking, well, you know, he probably just screwed it up. So then, you know, it'll take me a while. I go back and I look through the code and I spend some time thinking through the code only to find out that it's really not anything that I need to change about it. It's just a difference in versions being used in one application versus another. The other issue is that when we're doing sprint planning, I'm picking up features, you know, that we have components in the toolkit for, but not really realizing that those features are maybe being changed or built simultaneously as I'm trying to build the feature. And so we have features that are being held up, and then, you know, it sounds like we're constantly blaming the toolkit team because we're saying, oh, I'm waiting on the toolkit, waiting on the toolkit. Whereas really it's just that, oh, I picked up this feature and they're still building this thing. They haven't had a chance to finish it yet. So I think if we can communicate that in our planning, then maybe we can plan to, okay, maybe we'll take this next sprint because, you know, this thing isn't finished yet. And that way we can move features to the process, and then once the component's ready, then we can finish it.
So I hand it off to Gary, who will run us through some examples.
Right. So we have some components examples here. For recently added and modified, we have a responsive lightbox for mobile web, the animations and transitions and grid. For upcoming ones, we have a color palette and the form components and validations and icons. So let's take a closer look at some of this. So this one, the responsive lightbox. So this is a very good UI improvement because like now we can utilize the mobile screen more effectively by displaying more content informations. And the best part of that is that the responsiveness has been built in the toolkit, so the developers don't have to like create that from ground up. And the next one.
Can I ask you a question about that one?
Yeah.
The scroll bar, that's part of it, right, as well? When the content of the mobile web or on desktop exceeds the lightbox there, visible lightbox there.
Has that been added yet, do you know?
Probably not.
I know what you're talking about. I don't know if that improvement has been added yet. We can check.
Okay.
Yeah. And for the grid, so this one, I think it's really making it easy for designers to add and align elements on a page. And so designers can really create a formula in a more consistent way and create a more structural harmony in design. So all three lines of business now have the grid, which is nice. And the next one would be the color palette. So colors is very critical for like our design. So I know for homes, you guys have so many colors and it's very difficult for you guys to manage. So that's Christina, she actually started the color palette. So it's really helped Jordan to manage the colors. So currently ADC doesn't have something like this, but we would like to create our own version based on what Christina has. Yeah, for the new brand.
Don't worry, homes developers. We'll talk about that soon.
Okay.
That might be the first time they're seeing it.
So this one, the multi-select auto suggest. So the previous CRE working to designer, Kathy, she create this components, design these components for in CRE, and that's on the right. So currently ADC is working on the new style flows, and we have this via preference screens, and we do that. We also want to use that. So basically, they are the same components, although they have a different styles, but they are the same. And for this one, the form components validations. So this from homes. So basically, this form has all the like error messages. So we have all the error handling built in the toolkit. So like the developers don't have to build it, right? So.
And as a designer or a developer, do you ever want to think about validation again? Because how many times have we solved this problem? You don't have to solve it again. You can solve it once, easy peasy.
Yeah. So for the icons, so we do have like three sets of icons now, and we do have icons for actually the same thing, but they can look different. Basically, we just name the same thing based on their usage. Yeah. And once again, our approach for designers, like we all should like think ahead and try to figure out like if there's existing components in the toolkits that can solve our current design problem. If not, then I think we should go reach out to the designers from the other teams and see if there's anything that we can leverage. And if not, at that point, and then we might consider one-off. Yeah, so that's our approach.
I think that, like going back to the Lightbox example, I think that was a really big win since the Toolkit Council team formed. I forget who it was, if it was Homes that wanted this responsive light box. And I think the 3 designers got together and one said, we want to do this to the light box. We want it to be responsive. The other 2 designers said, that's awesome. We want that too. They gave it, I think Connor built it into the light box. The light box became responsive. And as soon as every application picked up the new version of the toolkit, all of the light boxes across ADC, CRE, and Homes were responsive. And I think that shows the power of the toolkit, and I really hope that we can have a lot more of those moving forward.
Okay, so we kind of threw a lot at you guys. So where can you find all this documentation, everything that we've been talking about? So we do have 2 sets of documentation, the dev toolkit, which is really well organized. You can kind of go by the component level. The URL is there, but you know, this is kind of where you can keep up to date, learn more about the toolkit or what's in it, but definitely, you know, like Jordan was saying, keep it organic. If you guys have any questions, feel free to talk to, you know, Emily or anyone who's on the toolkit team. On the design side, we're playing a little bit of a catch up. We've started this URL, which we're hoping to host all the design resources, maybe even including some marketing resources that for each line of business in this one location. So that's coming soon. We're still in the works on that, but we'll keep you guys updated when that's launched or ready. And yeah, and like we were all mentioning, if there's any comments, questions, improvements that you guys can think of or want to contribute to, feel free to reach out to us.
We have 9 more minutes.
Hi, I have a question. I see you were recording the meeting. I have some teammates that cannot make it to the meeting, so if you can share the video, it would be great.
Yes, this meeting is recorded, and after this meeting is over, once we process the video and everything, I will send out the link. And you can also go on to wiki page 10 Talk. There are all the events archived there, video and presentation links as well.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
I'll send out in the email.
Are there any questions? Nobody has any questions? Do all the developers, at least the ones who haven't already walked away, understand how the toolkit is included in your project? I don't know if you guys touched on the fact that it is an NPM module that you import, right? I'll take the silence as a question mark.
I can say start including components. I think that's as close as I got to that.
Yeah, that's
Is that information in that wiki, the toolkit wiki? I think that's a good idea to include that.
That's a good point. Yes. Say it again, John.
We don't use any of this development in marketing.
Yes, because we do not need.
Well, the design side we definitely will use, but currently right now, our marketing department does not cover any of this stuff.
But you guys are still using Flash, right?
We're actually using image mapping.
Oh, God.
We're using Corel Draw. Hey, I have a couple questions. There wasn't an ADC color palette, and then the icon thing looked pretty thin. And then we have this project where we're trying to rebuild the whole community page and bring it over to our new Learning Center page. Do we have one of those UX, UI guys that works on ADC that could help out a copywriter and a bunch of, yay!
Tim, we should talk because it depends depending on the environment that it's in. Gary's dedicated to product, and so I don't know if we have a UX person on the marketing side, and so if you guys need support, we should talk. Because I know that the WordPress environment doesn't have the same component library, and so we may have to mimic the library in WordPress.
Yeah.
It's a whole different environment. It does not even on WordPress.
All right.
Real quick, I'm a little confused about React Toolkit. Is that a new, different software that we have to purchase so I can actually open up all the files and use the elements?
So, no, React is the developer environment that they're using. It doesn't really impact the designers. So it's basically once it translates from design into the developers, that's when it goes into React. So it really doesn't involve the designers.
Well, if I need to use, for example, if I need to use, you know, the header and subhead sizes and the spacing in between and buttons and everything, where is all this located so I can pull and put it into the new web pages that I'm designing?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, Christina kind of touched on that at the end. I know I promised something before the new year. We're still working on it. The design side, we're still in Sketch. So as long as you're working in Sketch, you can just pull any of our components in. For now, I think the quickest way, if Debbie's okay with it, is just reach out to Gary and have him walk you through the current style guide and have him send you the sketch file until we can actually build out the designer portal.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks to Nirvana. Thanks for speaking up.